For years, they were Hollywood's most picture-perfect couple, a country music star with a troubled past and a Hollywood icon who had already lived through one of the most public marriages in history. Together, Keith Urban and Nicole Kidman seemed like a fairy tale built on second chances. Red carpet appearances, public declarations of love, and two beautiful daughters later, they became a symbol of survival, of redemption, and of what love can look like after heartbreak. But now, at 57, Keith Urban has finally broken his silence, and what he's revealing about their marriage has fans reeling, because behind the glamorous photos and magazine covers, there was a war being fought in silence, one that nearly ended it all. Keith's demons didn't vanish with the vows, and Nicole's past didn't stay buried. There were moments, private, raw, and terrifying, when the marriage was hanging by a thread. And for the first time, Keith is admitting just how dark it really got, and how close they came to walking away. So what really happened behind closed doors? Why is Keith Urban speaking out now, after all these years of protecting their privacy? And what does his confession reveal about what it truly takes to stay married in the spotlight? Stay with us, because once you hear the truth about Keith and Nicole's journey, the pain, the perseverance, and the heartbreaking honesty, you'll never look at their love story the same way again. From the outside, Keith Urban and Nicole Kidman look like everything Hollywood pretends to be: flawless, graceful, enduring. But behind the flashbulbs and award show kisses was a story of quiet collapse, private tears, and years of healing that nearly didn't happen. When they married in 2006, it was seen as a kind of redemption arc. Nicole rising from the ashes of her turbulent marriage with Tom Cruise, and Keith, the country superstar with a golden voice and a haunted past, finally finding stability. But what most didn't know is that just months after their wedding, Nicole was already confronting a devastating reality. Keith's demons hadn't disappeared with the vows. His long-time battle with addiction, which he had kept hidden behind charm and success, came crashing into their new life like a storm no honeymoon could withstand. Less than 4 months into their marriage, Nicole staged an intervention. Not out of anger, but out of desperation. She loved him too much to lose him to the bottle, and he was too far gone to save himself. Keith would later describe that moment as the turning point that changed everything. He checked into rehab, not for his career, not for appearances, but because the woman he had just vowed to love had drawn a line in the sand and refused to let him drown. That moment didn't just test their love, it forged it. But recovery isn't a quick fix. The years that followed were messy. Keith has admitted that there were times he felt unworthy of Nicole's love, that her presence in his life made him feel like God had looked down on me. And yet, that awe came with pressure, the fear of failing her, of dragging her through another public collapse. Nicole, for her part, was not unscathed. Having endured years of tabloid cruelty, high-profile heartbreak, and the quiet grief of a marriage that once controlled her every move, she had finally stepped into something real. But that reality came with raw edges. Keith wasn't polished. He was still breaking, and she stayed, not because she was saving him, but because she saw the man beneath the wreckage, and she refused to let him disappear. Together, they built a world on transparency and brutal honesty. Therapy wasn't optional. Trust had to be rebuilt daily, and while the world saw red carpet smiles and sweet interviews, they were, in truth, navigating a marriage that had survived fire before it even found foundation. Keith would later confess in a recent interview that for years he wore a mask, not to deceive Nicole, but to protect her from the full weight of his shame. But shame is poison in love, and in time the only way forward was through full exposure, confessing the relapses, the fears, the self-loathing. Nicole didn't flinch. She didn't run. She listened. And slowly something extraordinary began to happen. The illusion cracked, and what remained was real. Not perfect, not easy, but real. Keith now says their love is not built on romance or glamour, but on resilience, on survival, on the willingness to walk through fire together, over and over again. And that's the truth he's finally ready to admit. Not that their marriage was a fantasy, but that it almost didn't survive at all. And that's what makes it beautiful. In recent interviews, Keith Urban hasn't just reflected on the highs of his marriage, he's finally spoken about the moments that nearly destroyed it. Moments where the damage couldn't be hidden behind stage lights or studio magic. Moments where he stared into the mirror and didn't recognize himself. Addiction, as he describes it now, wasn't just a problem. It was a personality, a shadow self that constantly threatened to devour everything he loved. And Nicole, as loving as she was, could only stand so close to the fire before it began to burn her too. Keith admitted that the lowest point came just months after their wedding, when he was spiraling in secret, sabotaging a happiness he never believed he deserved. He would wake up in hotel rooms not remembering the night before, carrying shame so deep that he couldn't look Nicole in the eyes. And yet she stayed, not blindly, not passively, but with fierce, unrelenting boundaries. When she organized his intervention, Keith didn't lash out. He broke down. In his own words, "She chose me, but I didn't know how to choose myself." That moment marked the collapse, not just of his control, but of the illusion he'd held for years, that fame could heal what family couldn't, that love could be earned through success, that his demons were manageable if he smiled hard enough. But Nicole stripped all of that away. She loved him without condition, but she refused to be consumed by his chaos. She stood her ground, not because she didn't love him, but because she did, deeply. And that love wasn't passive, it was tough, unwavering and clear. Keith entered rehab within days, not as a PR stunt, but as an act of survival. And what followed was a long, humbling journey back to himself. He described the early days of recovery as like learning how to breathe again. There were tears, relapses of thought if not action, and the constant fear that he'd fall back into the abyss. Nicole didn't hover. She didn't coddle. She held space. She created an environment where healing could happen. But it was up to Keith to step into it. And slowly he did. Through therapy, through songwriting, through vulnerability, he began to unravel the pain of his childhood, the scars of abandonment, the sense that he had to perform to be loved. He started writing songs not just for hits, but as confessions. And Nicole, always listening, never judging, became the quiet witness to his rebirth. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't the fairy tale the tabloids tried to sell. It was real work. And Keith, with rare honesty, has said, "Nicole saved my life, but she didn't fix me. I had to do that myself." That's the truth he's finally ready to tell. That marriage isn't magic, it's a choice. A daily, painful, beautiful choice to show up, to tell the truth. To ask for help, to admit when you're broken, and to let someone love you anyway. What Keith Urban now understands is that his marriage to Nicole Kidman was never meant to be perfect. It was meant to be true. And in that truth, in the pain they've survived, their love has become something far deeper than fantasy. It has become freedom. Before Keith Urban ever walked into her life, Nicole Kidman was already carrying the weight of a broken past, a history marked by global fame, emotional isolation, and a marriage to Tom Cruise that became less about love and more about control. For years, Nicole was trapped in a relationship that seemed perfect on paper, but left her feeling invisible behind closed doors. The tabloid narrative painted her as the fragile beauty clinging to a superstar, but the truth was far more painful. She gave up more than the public ever knew, roles, autonomy, even her voice at times, all in the name of keeping peace. So when that marriage ended, Nicole emerged not as a woman scorned, but as a woman reborn. Scarred, yes, but finally in search of something real. She didn't want another fairy tale. She wanted truth. And then came Keith. Not a movie star, not a polished Hollywood product, but a country singer with dirt under his fingernails and pain behind his smile. Nicole saw something in him she couldn't explain. Not just charm, but recognition. Another soul carrying unseen wounds. And for the first time in years, she felt seen. But loving Keith meant walking into more chaos. She didn't know how deep his addictions ran, or how much of her strength she would have to give to help him survive. And yet, when his world began to fall apart just months after their wedding, Nicole didn't run. She stood still. That moment, when she staged the intervention that sent him to rehab, wasn't an act of desperation. It was an act of conviction. She believed in the man underneath the wreckage, and she was willing to fight for him. But Nicole didn't sacrifice herself in the process. Unlike in her previous marriage, this time she drew boundaries. She loved Keith, but she refused to lose herself to his pain. And in that strength, she gave him the space to begin again. She became his anchor, not his savior. And Keith has since admitted that it was her quiet strength, not loud declarations or dramatic ultimatums, that pulled him back from the edge. She held her ground with grace, even as the media speculated, even as friends warned her to walk away. And when asked why she stayed, Nicole's answer was simple: because he chose to fight. It wasn't about perfection. It was about progress, about watching the man you love tear himself open and rebuild, piece by fragile piece. And through it all, Nicole stayed rooted in love, not fantasy. She understood what it meant to survive a marriage built on illusion. This time she chose one grounded in brutal honesty. She once said in an interview, "With Keith, I never feel alone." And for a woman who had once stood in the shadows of someone else's spotlight, that feeling was everything. Their love became a space of healing, not just for Keith, but for both of them. Nicole stopped trying to prove herself. Keith stopped trying to hide. And in that emotional nakedness, they found something most couples in the spotlight never do: freedom through truth. Today, Nicole and Keith don't pretend they're perfect. They know what it's like to stand at the brink and to choose each other anyway. That's the truth Keith is finally sharing. Not a fairy tale, not a PR stunt, but a story of two broken people who met at the right time and chose to heal together. Now, at 57, Keith Urban doesn't look back on his marriage as a story of romance wrapped in red carpets and magazine covers. He sees it as something far more sacred, a covenant that was built not on perfection, but on survival, vulnerability, and grace. In the quiet spaces between the spotlight and the stage, Keith has become something he once thought impossible. A man at peace with himself, a devoted husband, and a present father. He speaks now with the kind of clarity that only comes after walking through fire. The marriage he shares with Nicole Kidman wasn't saved by grand gestures or sweeping promises. It was saved in the smallest, most honest moments. Sleepless nights where Nicole listened without judgment. Morning walks where Keith confessed his fears, shared journals, joint therapy sessions, and the shared understanding that love without truth isn't love at all. He reflects on fatherhood as the final redemption, raising two daughters who will never know the man he was before their mother drew the line that saved him. They know a father who shows up, who apologizes, who sings lullabies not just for the stage, but for their hearts. Keith says he still wakes up some mornings with a flicker of that old shame. But now, instead of running from it, he reaches for Nicole's hand. And it's there, always there. Not to rescue him, but to remind him that he is not alone anymore. That's what makes their love real, not its beauty, but its resilience. And now, as Keith continues to create music, tour the world, and tell his story with more honesty than ever before, he hopes people see beyond the fame. He wants them to understand that redemption is possible, that love can be messy and still be worth it, and that healing doesn't come in a single moment. It comes in the daily decision to show up, to be seen, and to let someone love you completely. He often says, "I wouldn't be here without her," and he means that, not just metaphorically, but literally. Nicole Kidman didn't just stand by his side. She helped him become the man who could finally stand on his own. And Keith Urban, in all his flaws and honesty, now offers that story not as a celebrity confession, but as a gift. A message to anyone who feels like they're too broken to be loved. That sometimes the right person won't try to fix you. They'll wait while you fix yourself and love you through every fractured piece. That's the truth he's finally ready to tell. And in that truth, Keith and Nicole have found not just survival, but something far more lasting. A legacy of hope.